Muy buenas noches, muy buenas tardes.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. From Berlin, Germany, we begin the broadcast of Demolishing Political Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and please remember to help us out with a thumbs up, a like against censorship. On the other side of the screen, and the other side of the European continent, from Madrid, Spain, we are joined by Juan Antonio Aguilar. Dear Juan Antonio, how is everything over there?
Aguilar, querido Juan Antonio, ¿qué tal todo por ahí?
Muy bien.
Very well, good evening.
Juan Antonio, en esta transmisión vamos
Greetings to everyone watching us. Juan Antonio. In this broadcast, we're going to go over the main geopolitical topics from the past few days. There are quite a few, by the way, but I wanted to start this overview with the following topic. Because surprisingly, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, from the United States, of course, Pete Hegseth made an urgent call to all the high-ranking officers of the US Armed Forces, asking them to attend an emergency meeting without announcing its subject, as you can see here in the image. The news was initially published by the Washington Post just recently, only a few hours ago.
Inicialmente por Washington Post, hace muy poquito, hace horas nomás. Hegseth ordena una reunión urgente y poco común de 100.
Hegseth orders an urgent and unusual meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals. The Pentagon has summoned military officers from all over the world. In effect, they have called upon senior US officers from every command across the planet Earth. The Pentagon has summoned military officers from all over the world to a meeting in Virginia. Not even the high-ranking generals and their staffs know the reason for the meeting. Juan Antonio, should this be a cause for concern, or is it simply another theatrical move by the Trump administration?
Teatral más de la administración de Donald Trump.
Well, let's see. Everything in the Trump administration is theatrical, so it shouldn't come as any surprise. Cause for concern? Rationally speaking, not really. And I'll tell you why. Because gathering hundreds of generals and admirals isn't for something very secret and very important, since information about what was discussed and what wasn't will immediately leak out. It's just impossible. Think about it. Hundreds of generals and admirals, all receiving information that they'll have to discuss with their staff, and their staff as well, and they have wives and brothers and children, and so on. Come on, in the end, it would end up leaking one way or another. The issues to be discussed would end up leaking, which could be very sensitive. What do I think and what does this suggest to me? Well, that this is an internal matter, meaning there's going to be some kind of reorganization in the Pentagon, possibly measures to cut costs in certain areas, possibly warning that the U.S. Armed Forces are not at their best right now, and maybe certain policies need to be implemented. I think it's more along those lines. That is, I think Trump, especially knowing him, may have seen that things aren't up to the standard he would like. I'm not saying they're in a dire situation, but maybe Trump thinks they should be at a much higher level and has probably ordered that, everyone needs to be called to account, give the necessary reprimands, and possibly discuss defense policy issues, but internal ones. That is, they're not going to meet to declare war on anyone. All those things would be top secret and possibly only a very few chiefs, basically what would be the defense general staff, because in our countries, they are the ones who would know the plan. And then yes, let's see if, for example, just to imagine, right, they were thinking about some kind of action in the Caribbean. Why would they call the commanding general of the base in Okinawa? It makes no sense. I mean, it's simply a risk that the information could be leaked. Therefore, I believe it shouldn't be a major concern if we think rationally. And then what is true is that everything gets overly dramatized. Look how simple it would have been to say, hey, let's call together all the military commanders because we're going to look at what reforms we can make in defense policy, in the organization and structure of the armed forces, and in the leadership of the Pentagon, etc., to optimize and improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the military. They could have just said it calmly, and that would be it. It would probably be the most normal thing in the world. But no, it's better to put on a show with everyone there, all the generals and admirals. There will be photos. And I don't know, as always, they're trying to show some kind of illusory strength, ultimately to feed the narrative that they are the greatest military power in the world, invincible, the saviors of humanity and the entire galaxy, etc. I think that, in principle, if it were something really much more important, it wouldn't be announced, or all those people wouldn't be called in. You have to consider that among many of those generals and admirals, there are probably some from purely administrative bodies, for example, military justice, just to name one. So I don't think they're going to discuss particularly strategic issues, at most operational and organizational ones.
Bien, Juan Antonio, sobre esta...
Well, Juan Antonio, regarding this situation related to the need for the updating of the US armed forces, in fact, from the very beginning, both Trump, since the start of Trump's second administration, both Trump and his team kept hammering on and on about the terrible state of the US armed forces and the need to make substantial changes. But so far, when it comes to changes, I can almost only recall those related to the prohibition or exclusion of trans people. I don't remember if it was an outright exclusion or a full ban, but there was definitely some policy aimed at their removal, or at the very least, at rejecting the promotion of trans people.
Trans people have been expelled from active service.
Bueno, entonces directamente expulsados, pero...
Well then they're directly expelled. But beyond these policies, which are obviously aimed much more at the domestic market and internal political disputes, right? These issues related to identity politics. Has the United States really begun a process of restructuring its armed forces when it comes to truly fundamental decisions, or not, in your opinion, as a military analyst?
No, yo creo, a ver, hasta ahora no. Lo que yo creo que se dan cuenta, y no es muy difícil darse cuenta.
No, I think, well, not so far. I think they realize it's not very hard to see that the current cost of American defense is exorbitant. We're talking about $1 trillion, a trillion with a T. So that's a cost that needs to be optimized. It can't be the waste we've seen up until now. I mean, the Pentagon's accounts don't add up at all. After several audits in recent years, billions of dollars have disappeared. Billions of dollars have gone missing. So that can't continue.
Miles de millones de dólares han desaparecido. Entonces, eso no puede ser. No puede ser tampoco...
It also can't be about maintaining an exorbitant level of spending that stretches your resources so thin that it's impossible to do anything else, because all your money goes into it. So we've heard Trump talk at times about reducing troops in Europe, now in Eastern Europe, even in the Baltics. In other words, to leave the spending to the Europeans. And that will likely happen in other parts of the world as well, simply for optimization reasons, because there isn't enough money. It's simple. If you want, for example, you have a nuclear capability, excluding submarines, that is very outdated. Updating that nuclear capability costs a fortune, an absolute fortune.
Un dineral, un auténtico dineral. Y lo tiene que sacar de algún sitio, el presupuesto es el que es. Y está cerrado.
You have to get it from somewhere. The budget is what it is and it's already set. Somehow you have to optimize that money and you'll have to reallocate funds. Then, it's also been seen how mobilization is very low. In other words, the appeal for young people to join the army is very low, and that requires policies to bring the armed forces closer to the population, which somehow need to be promoted. And that also costs money. Finally, it has been observed, and we saw it with the murder of Charlie Kier, how some military officers have been applauding the killing, which has led to some dismissals.
Lo cual ha provocado algunas destituciones. ¿Qué nos indica eso? Que hay división en el ejército.
What does that tell us? That there is division in the army, that there is division in the armed forces. I imagine that along with all this and the increase in effectiveness and efficiency, there will also be a part involving the purging of sectors closer to the Democrats, meaning military leaders appointed by them, and Trump is probably thinking about replacing them. So, well, one way to do that is to organize a big shakeup there, with generals and admirals summoning them all one after another. And surely, with the issue of eliminating agencies, eliminating offices, moving things around, closing departments, and so on, you optimize and purge. I think that's what's going on here, because until now, certainly Trump hadn't done, it's true, it had only been 9 months, but he hadn't really done anything regarding the reorganization of the armed forces.
Nada realmente con el tema de la reorganización de las Fuerzas Armadas. En unos Estados Unidos donde hemos visto.
In the United States, where we have seen a lot of billing for the military-industrial complex, it is also true that this complex does not return the investment in the way that would be desirable. And we could mention some of the latest investment projects in weaponry that have been complete failures. From those frigates that seemed to be high-tech and ended up rusting in ports because they were useless, to the budget waste represented by the F-35. Now they want to get involved with the 6th-generation aircraft, but the cost is enormous. In the case of the B-21, of which there are only 2 test units, it's also going to be another huge expense. So of course, in the end, as I said before, you have the money you have. That's it. It's what you have budgeted. So what do? Well, if you want to invest more in other things, you have to make cuts.
Si quieres invertir más en otras cosas, tienes que recortar. Tienes que recortar de otros sitios. Es más,
you have to cut from other areas. In fact, they'll have to refill the critical arsenals, because with some of the weapon systems, they've basically run out. They're empty. For example, the THAAD system, the ballistic missile defense system, which Israel has been using during the 12-day war. There's not even enough to supply. Or the issue with the Patriots. The Patriots that have arrived, the 3 batteries that have reached Ukraine, were German. In other words, they were the operational German ones. And now they have to give the Germans the 3 they sent so they could get to Ukraine as quickly as possible. But of course, they're talking about next year. That's the production pace. If that doesn't improve, if it doesn't intensify, if those resources aren't optimized, then the deterioration of the U.S. armed forces is going to keep getting worse. Martiano mentions this a lot, doesn't he?
Esto lo cita mucho Martiano, precisamente.
Juan Antonio,
Juan Antonio, in recent days, during the general debate at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Trump gave a very long speech with many statements on different issues, including the matter of the war in Ukraine. But above all, he accompanied these statements with a post on his social network, this one here, a post apparently about a change in his administration's position regarding the war in Ukraine. Here is the translation of his post.
Aquí la traducción de su publicación. Tras conocer y comprender plenamente la situación.
After fully understanding the military and economic situation between Ukraine and Russia, and after observing the economic problems it is causing, I believe that Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and recover its original form. With time, patience, and financial support from Europe, and particularly from NATO, the original borders from where this war began are a viable option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years in a war that a true military power should have won in less than a week. This does not benefit Russia. In fact, it makes it look like a paper tiger. When the people of Moscow and all the major cities, towns, and districts of Russia discover the true nature of this war, the near impossibility of getting gasoline, the long lines that form, and all the other problems affecting their war economy, where most of their money is spent fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit and is growing stronger, Ukraine will then be able to take back its country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further. Putin and Russia are in serious economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any case, I wish both countries the best. We will continue supplying weapons to NATO so that they can do whatever they want with them. Best of luck to Ukraine and everyone. This is his message on truth, and today he was responding to a question at a press conference regarding this. Attention, one moment.
Un segundo. Ahora sí, de nuevo.
All right, again, 1 second.
La pregunta del periodista.
The journalist's question is as follows. You said something regarding Ukraine, about the possibility that Ukraine could reconquer all of its territory.
Territorio. Y responde Trump.
And Trump replies,
Sí, cambié mi posición efectivamente.
yes, I did change my position, in fact, after seeing how Russia has been acting. I am very dissatisfied with what Russia is doing and with what President Putin is doing.
Estoy muy insatisfecho con lo que está
I am very dissatisfied with what Russia is doing and with what Putin is doing. Sorry. I'm very dissatisfied with what Russia is doing, and I'm very dissatisfied with what Putin is doing. I didn't like it at all. He's killing people for no reason. I don't like it at all. It's killing a lot of people for no reason.
And they are doing very poorly, considering they have put it all out on the line.
And they're really performing very poorly.
Pusieron todos sus recursos ahí, toda la carne al asador.
They put all their resources into it, went all in.
Hell out of everything, and they're picking up a very little territory.
Están bombardeando Ucrania con todo.
They are bombing Ukraine with everything they have. Their economy is being heavily affected. It's a disaster, and they have barely managed to conquer any territory in Ukraine. In fact, they are losing territory in Ukraine.
De hecho, están perdiendo territorio en Ucrania.
I think it's been very bad for the reputation of Russia. This war should.
I think this has been very bad for Russia's reputation.
Muy malo para la reputación de Rusia. Esta guerra se tendría que haber terminado muy rápido.
This war should have ended very quickly. If this had been a United States war, we would have won it in a week.
La habríamos ganado en una semana.
And they're getting into fourth year, Jeff. They're getting into the fourth year now. 4 years of fighting, and you see.
They're entering the fourth year, Jeff. They're entering the fourth year now. 4 years of struggle, and you see what they've taken. And on the other hand, they've been fighting without much sense for 4 years, and you see what they've achieved so far.
A month they've taken very little, and you've been reporting on all the bombing.
A month ago, they made very little progress, and have mostly been reporting on all the bombing, all the drones everywhere, 900 drones coming in.
Certain areas like Kiev and.
They are barely gaining any territorial conquests, despite the massive drone attacks, including attacks with 900 drones at once. And with all that, they are hardly gaining any territory. I am very disappointed with President Putin. Juan Antonio, what's your take on this?
Juan Antonio, ¿qué lectura realizás de esto?
La primera es que ya sabemos que este hombre es un charlatán.
The first thing is that we already know this guy is a charlatan. So, well, what's still impressive here is that there are media outlets that echo the nonsense of a clown like this. He's a clown. No offense to clowns who do a great job. Let's see, maybe he's just misinformed. Of course, if the one informing him is General Kellogg, who's a corrupt guy whose daughter has business in Ukraine, it's very likely they're feeding him the tall tales coming out of Zelensky's green powder keg in Kiev. So, well, he might say stupid things. On the other hand, hey, look at that. Russia is losing. This is a disaster. Well, that's better for the United States, right?
Esto es un desastre, pues mejor para Estados Unidos, ¿no? No sé, le veo muy preocupado por el futuro de Putin. No sé, la sensación de.
I see you're very concerned about Putin's future. I don't know. It feels like this isn't good for the Russians. We have to help them. It's just honestly empty chatter, completely worthless. I mean, it's just only ridiculous people would dare to say, listen to what Trump says. Ridiculous people. Because this man says nothing but nonsense. Let's see. Facts. Just facts. Since the beginning of the year, Russian troops have advanced 5,000 square kilometers and have liberated 204 towns. Heavy losses. Well, obviously it's a war. There will be losses. But for example, I'll give you just one detail.
Pero, por ejemplo, voy a dar un detalle, simplemente un detalle. Desde principios de año, el intercambio de cadáveres de soldados.
Since the beginning of the year, the exchange of bodies of soldiers killed in combat is 39 to 1. One Russian for every 39 Ukrainians. To call those losses, right? But those are exaggerated losses. Trump always talks about millions of deaths. I don't know where those millions of deaths are, the huge Russian losses. Well, it's 39 to 1. By now, practically everyone acknowledges that the number of Ukrainian deaths is approaching 1 million, to which you have to add between 500,000 and 700,000 deserters, missing persons, etc. That's what you call demilitarizing. Of course, maybe what he really wants is to send messages to Moscow that he doesn't like what they're doing because they're not negotiating the way he wants. In other words, it's a way to put pressure.
Es decir, una forma de presionar. Puede que lo esté intentando, ¿no? Una forma de presionar. O simplemente...
Maybe he's trying, right? It's a way to put on pressure. Or maybe he's just being carried along, as I said, by those magnificent advisors he has, like the corrupt Kellogg or the brilliant minds at the Pentagon. And here we get to another part of what Trump says. That is, if Russia were a great power, it would have won in a week. Not like the United States, which took 20 years to be defeated in Afghanistan and couldn't do it, had to run away because it wasn't able to subdue the Taliban. Not to mention Vietnam, what happened in Iraq, other glorious milestones of the so-called American forces. Let's be honest, since the Korean War, their performance has been terrible. American and Western weapons in general have performed terribly. The way Russia is conducting this war of attrition has not only made Ukraine, since 2023, incapable of fighting on its own. No. It's that NATO had to step in, with 50 countries coming to help, only to see their own arsenals depleted, because they too have been unable to stop the Russians. They launched the famous counteroffensive, a disaster. They launched the famous offensive in Kursk, another disaster. They've thrown all their reserves in to try to stop the advance through Prokhorovka, because of course, that's the last line of defense in Donbass, and if it falls, the whole front collapses. Well, that's where their reserves are being burned up. And this gentleman is saying more or less that the economic difficulties, well, considering that it's the most sanctioned country in the world, and whether you like it or not, that has an impact. For example, when a refinery is hit, I can point out that maybe there are tens or millions of liters of refined diesel that won't reach the gas station on time, and maybe that causes some kind of ripple effect somewhere. But the economy keeps growing. Not like he says, it keeps growing. This year, not just a few percent, but more. And moreover, Russia's strategic reserves are currently at $712 billion, not counting the $300 billion stolen by this gang of crooks, the Westerners. In other words, more than double what they had at the start of the war. Those are their reserves. So, well, he can say whatever he wants. I mean, we're used to it. That's just Trump's style. He's very concerned about the thousands of deaths in Ukraine. Fine, very humane, very understandable. He doesn't care at all about the thousands of deaths in Gaza or about those that have happened all over the world because of American interventions. Those have never bothered him. It's the typical moral misery of all these people, the typical moral supremacism of Westerners. I recently read a report, some statistics, about the deaths caused by American sanctions on all the countries they sanction around the world. We're talking millions of deaths, millions of deaths. Donald, you fool, you clown, millions of deaths. What the hell are you talking about? Well, whatever, man, you're winning, so go on, keep at it.
Pues nada, hombre, vas ganando. Pues venga a seguir. Venga, sigamos adelante. Venga, que vamos ganando. De victoria en victoria hasta la derrota.
Come on, let's move on. Come on, we're winning. From victory to victory until the final defeat. Honestly, what strikes me the most isn't what Trump says. He's already got us used to that. What really gets me is that there are idiots in the media, and I mean most of them, idiots who echo the words of a charlatan, an intellectual pauper, a clown who listens to the first person who whispers nonsense in his ear, like the corrupt Kellogg. And there are idiots who tell you, no, listen to Trump. Listen to Trump. What are you going to listen to Trump for, man? He doesn't say anything but lies or nonsense. Well, that's where we are, right? Fine, let them eat their own bread and keep going since they're winning. Come on.
Juan Antonio, algunos analistas, incluso
Juan Antonio, some analysts, including Western analysts, are interpreting Trump's words as follows. Trump uses these boastful statements, these tricks, these provocations, as a smokescreen to leave Ukraine in the hands of the Europeans, in a situation where the war already appears lost, and the Europeans will have to answer for this dead weight, for this leaden lifeline. Here, for example, even Reuters, an American outlet, instead of echoing Zelensky's optimism about Trump's change of stance on Ukraine and Russia, is already presenting this with pessimism. Here's the news, for example. Behind the optimistic comments, some see Trump distancing himself from Ukraine. Trump's comments mark a shift in the United States' position on Ukraine. It's unclear what role the United States will take in supporting Kiev. Some analysts and officials say that Trump is disengaging from the issue. Europeans are looking to strengthen support for Kiev, and Trump could change his mind about Ukraine behind these provocations, these grandiose words. Is this possible, Juan Antonio?
No, let's see. Trump has already abandoned Ukraine. He's doing business. He said so himself. It's not my intention to make money from the war in Ukraine. But if the Europeans want to buy, then let them buy and do whatever they want with the weapons. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. Because deep down, there is something, because this must have been said to Trump as well. If the war is lost, who's going to take responsibility for the defeat? Who's going to take it on? Not a power as successful as the United States as we've seen in all their military interventions since the end of World War II, right? I mean, of course, they're not going to take responsibility. They win all the wars, right? And they make all the peace deals. You listen to Trump and, well, he stopped 7 wars. You go and look at him and you think, I don't know what he stopped, right? That is to say, well, and the really big ones, and the ones with human losses, those he hasn't stopped. Not in Eastern Europe, nor in the Middle East, right? So, well, yes, it's clear that I see it that way. I mean, Trump is pulling out of the mess. He's pulling out of the conflict. He sees it from afar, right? Like, well, Russia's doing bad things. No, Ukraine could recover the lost territories and even go further. Go further where? But come on. Of course, he's a character who, since he doesn't have the slightest idea what war is, says nonsense. Nonsense. Listen to Trump. He says nonsense. And then you realize, well, what would Ukraine need right now to be able to recover all the lost territory? 20% of the territory of the largest country in Europe. What would it need? And I'm not even talking about going further. What would it need? Well, thousands of armored vehicles and tanks, tens of thousands of drones, boosting aviation, modern defense systems, and in sufficient quantity. And above all, men. That is, fighters. Where are they going to get them from? Where are they going to get them from? Even they admit they would need about 35,000 a month, at a minimum, and they're only getting half that to replace losses. Where are they going to get them from? Are the Americans going to go there, really? It's all bluster. The bravado of a New York pimp. I mean, Trump doesn't know what war is. He doesn't know what war is. Why doesn't he send TT systems or more Patriot batteries here?
¿Por qué no le manda sistemas TAT o más baterías Patriot a Kiev? ¿Por qué no lo hace? Venga, hazlo.
Why don't you do it? Come on, do it. Come on, tough guy, go ahead. Why haven't they sent more Abrams tanks? Because they burn, right? That's what happens. They burn. Of course, you're going to say, hey, look, Russia is fighting against an army of 1 million men, armed, trained, financed, with proper logistics, with the whole system of satellite signals, reconnaissance, target selection from 50 countries. That's right, Donald, 50 countries, 50 of your lackeys. That whole gang of wretches who lick your boots. That's it. That's the war in Ukraine. That's the war in Ukraine. You've been roaring, barking, and howling for 2 years now.
Bramando, ladrando y lanzando aullidos desde hace 2 años. Os habéis tirado 3 años diciendo que Ucrania iba ganando.
You've spent 3 years saying that Ukraine was winning. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Look, if people aren't laughing in your face, it's simply because you have absolute control over the media. Otherwise, they'd be like they are in many parts of Africa, Asia, and America, just cracking up in your face. Because you've made a fool of yourselves. 50 countries, every time they met in Ramstein, pouring in billions and weapons and whatever else. The weapons were always supposed to be miraculous. Here come the javelins, here come the whatevers, the Abrams, the Challengers, the Leopards. Then come the HIMARS, then the Storm Shadows, then the Scalp EG.
Luego los Storm Shadow, luego los Scarlet. ¿Y qué habéis conseguido?
And what have you achieved? With your counteroffensives, what have you achieved? Made a fool of yourselves. You've made a fool of yourselves. And then to cover up the embarrassment, they tell me, no, come on, Russia is facing economic difficulties, not like Europe, which is in a full recession, right? No, Russia hasn't really advanced, right? No, come on, well, sure, 5,000 square kilometers so far this year. You might say it's not much, because in fact the Russian military strategy doesn't involve deep operations to gain territory, because that's not the point. It's just that since this guy doesn't understand war, he doesn't know what's going on. Since that's not the point, well, what we need to look at is how much of the enemy's army has been destroyed in these 9 months. No, the important thing isn't the 5,000 square kilometers. The important thing is everything that has been destroyed of the enemy's forces. The exhaustion of the enemy, not of Ukraine, which was already exhausted, the exhaustion of NATO. And if not, come on, how many Leopard tanks are NATO countries willing to send to help Kyiv? Come on, let's see. What they sent was the leftover scrap, what they had in storage until it started running out. And now what? What are you going to send? The F-16s, let's remember, when the F-16s arrive. The F-16s arrived and they're making a fool of themselves. And so it goes on. So no, we shouldn't give too much importance to Trump's words. I think his strategy is to get out of the conflict, do business if possible. Even BlackRock has left Ukraine, you know, and above all, to leave the mess behind and let the stupid Europeans take the blame for the defeat, because that's what they're stupid for. And in that, Trump is absolutely right. In that, he is absolutely right, because he saw their stupid faces, their clownish faces, and said, let them deal with the mess. And logically, the ones who pay are the poor Ukrainians. These people should act and think first.
Here, we have images of what happened yesterday at the White House during the visit of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to the United States. The meeting was characterized by various elements, but among others, within the framework of this meeting, Trump changed his position regarding European purchases of Russian oil. You may recall that not long ago, Trump had set as a condition for the United States to participate more actively in the war against Ukraine through sanctions and sending more weapons, the end of oil purchases by Europeans. Well, yesterday he was able to make calls with the Prime Minister of Hungary, Mr. Viktor Orban, and the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. Both of them, apparently during those calls, informed him of the obvious situation in their countries regarding the fact that they lack access to the sea and therefore can only purchase Russian oil and gas through the only existing pipeline in their countries. Well, based on that, Trump deliberated on this threat and during the subsequent press conference softened his stance, adjusted his position with something like, well, we don't want any more Russian oil purchases by Europe, except for Hungary and Slovakia, because they have no other option. So once again, back and forth, black and white. But beyond that, Erdogan and Trump surely had a very interesting conversation about this, and multiple topics, given Turkey's position in all of this. What topics? What might they have deliberated on? What elements could have come up in this meeting, dear Juan Antonio?
Look, at this point, are you telling me he didn't know that Slovakia and Hungary, the only way they can get gas is through the only existing pipeline and therefore it's Russian? He didn't know. Because anyone knows this. Anyone who has simply followed some of the channels where we talk a lot about this. He didn't know. He still didn't know. Well, that's enough to make you tremble, because the question is, what does this man know? Because the truth is, he knows nothing. He spouts nonsense and then has to backtrack. Why? Because someone must have told him, maybe Orban told him, maybe Fico told him. I mean, we don't have any other option. So what now? He didn't know. You didn't know. If you spend all day playing golf and talking nonsense and posting on Club Social, then you can't know. To know, you have to study. You have to read. Otherwise, he doesn't even read the calendar to know what day it is. So what happens? Well, he has to backtrack. But on top of that, he's been stringing us along with this for weeks now, if not months. Come on. Just impose the sanctions already. Come on. Why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't he do it? And then, well, he receives Mr. Erdogan, who must have performed one of his magic tricks almost in diplomacy to keep sitting in the two chairs that interest him, according to his own interests. He must have whispered in Trump's ear saying, I want the F-35s and I want, there's no need to go further, while he keeps buying Russian weapons as well. Why? Because it suits him to be right there, in the middle. Because Erdogan is a NATO member, right? And then Trump said, well, I don't want to buy the F-35s. Wonderful. Money, money, money. He started hearing the jingle of coins. And that's it. And Erdogan left as cool as ever. Are the F-35s going to arrive in Turkey? Possibly on New Year's Eve. It doesn't matter, because this will change the moment Erdogan lands in Ankara. That's it. There's no need to dwell on it. The thing is, all these kinds of small summits are often, well, how can I put it, just a formality, right? I mean, you go in with a folder full of possible issues, options, and so on. And, well, how do you proceed? You focus on very important and sensitive topics, knowing that there won't be any agreements on those. But since you have to get something out of the meetings, you end up reaching agreements on other points that are the ones you actually care about. They talk about the F-35s, but then maybe, well, look, there's an agreement, for example, on collaboration in the area of nuclear energy, for Turkish nuclear power plants, for instance, right? And so, an agreement between companies or whatever, and they've already gotten something out of it. They've already gotten what deep down they knew they could get. But this is generally how it goes in all these kinds of meetings. You shouldn't be fooled. What happens is that afterwards they come out, hold press conferences, and then they talk about things as if they're very important, right? How many meetings, I mean, not even meetings, but how many contacts has Turkey, as a NATO member, had with the European Union, with the United States? It's been at NATO summits, it's been at, I mean, it was also at the Shanghai Cooperation Commission Summit. I mean, no, this really doesn't indicate high-level political operations, right? Well, you always meet with foreign heads of state because there are always issues to discuss and from which you can gain some benefit. Many times you're simply acting as a salesperson for American companies, or in this case, Turkish companies. That is, you're acting as a salesperson to establish purely commercial, purely business negotiation channels. I mean, look, is there going to be any strategic change in Turkey's position? I'm telling you no, not at all. What are they going to do? Close the Black Sea to Russian fruit? Come on. Seriously, when you hear these things, you have to look at the results and what happens afterward to really try to understand what was actually discussed or what agreement might have been reached, right? But no, since we're in the most absolute superficiality, I mean, listen to Erdogan and listen to Trump. Whatever they say at a press conference is going to be at a press conference in front of the head of state. No one is going to badmouth, no one is going to insult, no one is going to confront the head of state who doesn't even speak. That's not going to happen. So everything will be nice words and understanding. Well, then there are Trump's blunders, right? Like when he's asked a question about electoral fraud, he's next to Erdogan and says Erdogan knows a lot about this. I mean, what does that mean? That Erdogan has committed electoral fraud? Those are things that, but well, it's just that it's Trump. Damn it.
He's the best Trump, no doubt.
The Trump of, oh no, well, that doesn't even mean I'm accusing Erdogan. No. It's just that it didn't occur to him. If instead of Erdogan it had been Bukele, he would have said, and Bukele knows a lot about this. He's actually giving him a compliment. Of course, everyone understands. What do you mean he knows a lot? But anyway, there's no need to make a big deal out of it.
Juan Antonio, in a press conference today, Trump presented this.
The team from your administration, led by Vice President, preserve TikTok as a platform for the 170.
Here is the signing of the presidential decree regarding the acquisition of TikTok in the United States.
Million Americans who use it, while ensuring that their data is proper.
Well, his aide, his assistant.
Bueno, su ayudante, su asistente, básicamente recapitula los puntos principales.
Basically, it summarizes the main points of this presidential decree, this executive order, as they call it in the United States. Basically, it mandates a change of ownership from the current Chinese owners. Remember, TikTok is a Chinese social network. The US rejects this. Also, by the way, it is the fastest growing social network and the most popular among young people, among the youngest users. And this executive order mandates the acquisition of TikTok in the United States, not worldwide, but only in the United States, by American capital, actually by a friend of Trump himself, supposedly guaranteeing the protection of its users' data.
El cuidado de los datos de sus usuarios, el relato del asistente de Trump.
This is the account from Trump's assistant. Now Trump himself.
So this is interesting because,
Ahora sí, Trump. Bueno, esto es muy interesante porque
Well, this is very interesting because
with President Xi, a lot of respect for him. Hopefully,
it's very interesting because I had a very good conversation with President Xi Jinping.
Tengo mucho respeto por él.
he has a lot of respect for me too,
I have a lot of respect for him. He respects me a lot as well.
and other things. But we talked about TikTok, and
Hablamos sobre TikTok y otras cosas naturalmente también, pero también
We talked about TikTok and other things, of course, but also about this, about TikTok. And he gave us the green light. Now it will be operated by American investors.
the biggest, you don't get bigger, I don't imagine.
fantásticos inversores estadounidenses, de los más grandes, no hay más.
Fantastic American investors, some of the biggest. There are none bigger than them.
In charge of it, and maybe I'll have you say a few words about the deal.
Bueno, y llama
Well, and call J.D. Evans for explanations about this. What's your take on this, Juan Antonio?
Esto, Juan Antonio.
Bueno, a ver, es decir, esto nos indica una cosa.
Well, let's see. I mean, this doesn't mean something endless. The owners of TikTok have made a business, well, an endless one, because they've sold a part, the American part of TikTok, for $14 billion. And why would the United States want to buy the American part of TikTok? Well, because the West needs to have absolute control over social networks. For what? For social control, for control of the message. What we've seen is the establishment of a para-police apparatus for the control of citizens.
Un aparato parapolicial para el control de los ciudadanos. Porque claro, TikTok en mano china no estaba controlado.
Because of course, TikTok in Chinese hands wasn't controlled. TikTok still exists all over the world under Chinese ownership, except in the United States, where it's going to end up in the hands of the friends of big tech, the major American tech companies, who already control Facebook, who already control WhatsApp, who already control Instagram, who already control YouTube, who already control most international social networks. And therefore, they control the communication that exists with the social sectors that get their information through them, mainly young people.
Juan Antonio, perdón por la interrupción, pero gracias a TikTok, las imágenes
Well,
de la masacre
Antonio, sorry for the interruption, but thanks to TikTok, the images of the massacre by Israel against the Gazans spread around the world, despite censorship on mainstream US social media, as well as on US social networks like Facebook, Instagram, and even X, formerly Twitter, owned by Elon Musk. Through TikTok, those images of children massacred by Israeli bombings went around the world and generated the current reactions, right?
Claro, por eso digo que realmente es la firma.
Of course, that's why I say it's really the signing off on the censorship of the only social network in the United States that was still somewhat on the sidelines, right? It's true that Telegram already exists, and then there are social networks that don't depend on them, right? WeChat in China and other networks, and, well, some video platforms like BitChute, Rumble, and so on. But, I mean, the major ones are the ones controlled by these people.
Son las que controlan esta gente. Fijémonos que
let's note that it's possible there has been some kind of truce among the prominent elites, and we already discussed it at the famous dinner during Trump's visit to King Charles of England, at that dinner where the leaders of all these groups were present, from Apple to Meta, from the people at OpenAI to, well, practically everyone, NVIDIA, all the tech companies. Because what's coming and what they're going to try is control through all kinds of tricks, including censorship or legal persecution, control of the messages. And this purchase of TikTok for $14 billion is along those lines. The images you mentioned from Gaza might reach a user in Caracas, in Buenos Aires, in Zimbabwe, or in Singapore, but they won't reach American citizens, which is where the non-Zionists were very concerned about the shift in trends precisely because of the communications happening through uncensored social networks. So, well, once again, we see yet another step by the free world toward the imprisonment of thought throughout the West. Once again, the work of Trump. Well, changing? Possibly not because of Trump, because he probably didn't even know what was on TikTok. Possibly not because of Trump, but because they told him, Mr. President, we need to control this. It's in Chinese hands, the communists. And so he acted.
Exactly. Changing the focus of the analysis. We're now shifting our attention to Asia. Although before that, as always, I want to remind you, please, to support us, Demolishers, with a thumbs up, with a like, that helps us fight censorship on this platform. And by the way, I also want to remind you that yesterday we held the first debate in the series called Demolishing Political Myths. Yesterday, Fernando Moragon and Joseph H. from Miami participated in a very interesting debate about Putin, about Russia, about the United States, and about NATO. Don't miss it. The video is right there.
La OTAN, no lo desaprovechen, el video aparece ahí. Pronto participará también Juan Antonio como uno de los contendientes.
Juan Antonio Aguilar will soon participate as one of the contenders in this series of debates. That being said, I would like us to start the conversation about this leak. a leak published by the Iranians with images and names of Israeli nuclear scientists. By the way, images of the Demoliendo nuclear facility, very detailed information, leaked by the Iranians in the context of a conflict that is for now simply on hold, because all critical analysts predict that the war between Israel and Iran will resume soon. What is the significance of this leak, Juan Antonio?
The first thing that comes to mind is that the Iranian intelligence service has dealt a tremendous blow to Mossad, which has been almost incapable of carrying out sufficiently effective counterintelligence. They've gotten all the way in, as the saying goes. We're talking about thousands of documents. The Israeli nuclear program has now been clearly exposed to the whole world. The question that needs to be asked here is how the Iranian spies managed to get in there, because they had knowledge of what the Israeli nuclear plan is. And yet the IAEA, led by that scoundrel Grossi, has been incapable all these years of saying that Israel's nuclear facilities need to be inspected. Ultimately, and in conclusion, you don't have to be very smart for this. You don't have to be any kind of expert. The IAEA is nothing more than another racket, serving Western powers and serving Israel. It's obvious. I mean, we all know there are inspection agreements in Iran by the IAEA for its nuclear facilities, which are now practically annulled, reduced to a minimum, and so on. What I still don't understand, especially in countries of the global south, is how they continue to belong to the IAEA. They've sent us Grossi and his clique, and they've basically told all of us to get lost. And that organization should just be shut down because it only serves the interests of the United States. And when I say the United States, it's always tied to Israel, the global Anglo-Zionist interests, and nothing else. That is to say, what more is needed? What more is needed for someone to tell Israel, we are going to inspect your nuclear facilities, and you are going to declare what you are doing there and how much nuclear weaponry you have stockpiled? Right? We don't see that, do we? We're not going to see it, are we? Why? Because no, that's not going to happen. I'm one of the good guys. Are we going to go inspect Israel? Of course not. I'm one of the good guys. So this shows us, beyond the success of Iranian intelligence, what the IAEA is, and like many other United Nations agencies, what it really is, an instrument of Anglo-Zionist policies.
By the way, we are presenting the images from this leak, courtesy of our partner Telegram channel, Wars and Geopolitics. Many thanks for this information, and everyone is invited to subscribe to that Telegram channel. So it's super important for all of you to subscribe there. By the way, it's also very important that you support us by subscribing to our sister channel, MP Geopolitics, where, by the way, Juan Antonio Aguilar hosts his own show every Saturday alone, without my interruptions, and with total freedom. The same goes for Fernando Moragon, as well as many other analysts. And by the way, it's also very important that you now join us on our channel, Demolishing Myths in Politics in English.
Demoliendo mitos de la política en inglés, a partir de ahora traducido gracias a la inteligencia artificial.
From now on, translated thanks to artificial intelligence. We are starting this week. At the very least, if you don't want to join us because you don't want to watch the videos in English, at least help us spread the word among your English-speaking friends. There is always someone, some American or someone from another country who speaks English, who can't handle Spanish, and who from now on can join us that way. Juan Antonio, nothing better than your analysis of Grossi to introduce this last topic. This very interesting meeting, as part of the World Atomic Week Forum in Moscow yesterday, in which the following people participated. Pay attention to this list, some of them visible there.
En la cual participaron, atención a esta lista, ahí visibles algunos. Por un lado, Lukashenko, a la izquierda.
On one side, Lukashenko on the left. To his right, Putin, right? On the right, the Prime Minister of Armenia. I never remember if he's the Prime Minister or the President. I always make that mistake. But anyway, ultimately that's correct. And also, sitting around here, there's Putin in plain sight. Pay attention to who else participated there, a little further ahead. This man, my compatriot, the disgraceful Rafael Grossi, who, by the way, now wants nothing less than the position of Secretary General of the United Nations. This man, who was in charge of, or responsible for, leaking the information collected in Iran by the inspectors, by the members of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the International Nuclear Agency.
De energía atómica, la Agencia Nuclear Internacional, bueno, toda esa información filtrada a los israelíes.
Well, all that information leaked to the Israelis, obviously in bad faith, and also due to the naivety of the Iranians, evidently. Well, all of them participated in this meeting. And within the framework of these meetings, Lukashenko, speaking there, the Belarusian president, made two important statements. On one hand, he stated that Belarus will begin construction of its second nuclear power plant with Russia, with Rosatom, logically, something expected but not confirmed until now. But, on the other hand, he also confirmed that the Russian Oryeshnik missiles are on their way, those were his words, to be deployed as well on Belarusian territory. Juan Antonio, the significance of all this, your analysis, please.
De todo esto, análisis de todo esto, por favor.
Bueno, esto, lo primero, Lukashenko ha dicho lo de los Soletnik porque lo ha dicho.
First of all, Lukashenko said what he did about the Soretnik missiles because President Putin said it. Just let it go already. These things aren't said off the cuff. There's only one Trump in the world. It's obvious he said it because it's a message. The Soretnik missiles, each capable of carrying 6 nuclear warheads of 10 to 15 kilotons, are already being deployed in Belarus. The deployment zones have already been decided, and all of this is already very advanced. When they say they're about to arrive, it probably means they're already there. That's just how it is. It's significant that this Grossi, I'm guessing because, for the international trade in building nuclear power plants, in the end, countries need to have some confidence that they won't run into problems. And that's why that shameless guy from Ebro is there. Yes, we don't know if he's getting kickbacks or what to give his approval. And maybe, in fact, he's been sitting there and someone slipped him an envelope under the table. I'm not accusing anyone. You should never rule these things out completely. There are also some very important things about this meeting. For example, that next year the first Russian closed-cycle nuclear power plant will start operating. What does that mean? Well, that the big problem nuclear power plants have always had, the waste, is going to be solved. At least to a large extent, which of course is a boost for the development of nuclear energy. Very important. Very important. And obviously this will have economic consequences also for the Russian economy, because it is practically the country that builds the most nuclear power plants in the world due to reliability, safety, and guaranteeing the supply of uranium, the fuel for those plants. So, well, this is just another summit that no one in the West notices. No one says anything. No one explains or gives it the proper importance, so that Donald Trump can keep saying his nonsense and talking about how badly everything is going for Putin. So, well, I think this is important news. It has more significance than it seems, but we'll see in the future the impact of this kind of meetings, because there's an economic aspect to the sale and construction of nuclear power plants. I think Iran is going to get 4 more nuclear power plants. India as well. And other countries, including some in Africa, are already considering building their first nuclear power plant. Of course, they have uranium. What was incredible is that while uranium was being sold at a very low price for the French nuclear plant, there was no development in the African countries. The thing is, that's why I say these summits and so on, these decisions, you can see them much more clearly once they start taking shape in the future, right? So it was decided at the summit that took place in 2025 in Moscow at the World Atomic Forum. right? And well, the only thing is the saintly patience you need to have to watch these guys sitting there when we all know they're playing for the other side, right? But sometimes, because of business interests, you have no choice but to sit down with the scammer of the moment, who's a scammer, who's a thief. But well, you have to sit down with him because he's the one who holds the key to making a certain deal. You have no other choice. In the end, it's a very sad world. It's the one we have.
Precisely because in our work, we must constantly present news about sad issues, conduct analyses on unfortunate matters.
I'm sure that what Lukashenko would really like to do is grab Grush, kick him in the ass, and throw him out of there. I have absolutely no doubt about it. But well, that's what I'm saying, right?
Precisely for this reason, we always wrap up our broadcasts with a bit of humor. In this case, what we're about to present, we really can't tell if it makes you laugh or cry. Maybe we could describe these images as God brings them together. Or rather, maybe the CIA brings them together. This meeting in New York is mentioned between Al-Golani, who not so long ago was a head chopper with a bounty on his head offered by the United States, and the expired-term Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. How much Al-Golani has changed, right? There, signing some agreement, some nonsense. This image, good Lord.
Esta imagen, Dios santo. Juan Antonio, todo tuyo.
Juan Antonio, it's all yours. You could complete that image with another picture of the same Syrian figure with the so-called King of Spain, who is also seen with him. They are images indeed. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. Deep down, it's really sad to see these images. Anyway, what can I say? Because the only thing I feel like doing is letting snakes start coming out of my mouth. Because it shows the moral misery that rulers can lead to. I know there are a lot of interests involved. In Zelensky's case, most of them are media interests, mainly being in the spotlight, giving the impression that he has many allies around the world, that everyone is with Zelensky and with Kiev. You can understand that. The other figure is who he is, and now he's a man in a suit and tie. Well, the more photos taken of him in that context, well, you know, for the Syrian population and others, it's a way of normalizing him. I am convinced that this individual was an agent of Western intelligence services, not now, not when he was leading al-Nusra, not when he was a member of ISIS, but since he was a member of Al-Qaeda. Since then, I believe this man has been a member of Western intelligence services, with all the moral consequences that one might wonder about. Who has been supported? What has been justified? What has been concealed? So that real criminals, terrorists, genocidal maniacs, savages, well, now appear before us at the United Nations wearing ties, even taking photos with the so-called King of Spain.
Juan Antonio, and this here, pay attention to this other meeting of Al-Golani within the framework of the general debate at the United Nations Assembly in New York. Pay attention to this. This is David Petraeus, the former CIA director, of course, and at the time also commander of the United States Central Command, basically one of those responsible for the war in Iraq. Pay attention to this. If someone wanted this for a comedy, not even. This goes beyond anything. Reality surpassing fiction, fiction surpassing. Reality surpassing fiction. This next part is about you, personally.
How are you holding up under all?
The next question, in a candid tone, is for you personally. How are you handling this? How are you coping with the pressure? Are you able to think? Are you able to reflect? Are you able to sleep well at night? In an interview at the Concordia Forum between David Petraeus and Al-Golani, I've been there. It's very difficult. That's why I'm asking you this personal question.
personal.
You have a lot of fans, and I'm one of them.
Y tus muchos fans, y yo soy uno de ellos.
And your many fans, and I'm one of them. I'm your boss. And a big round of applause, a standing ovation there in New York for Al-Golani, until recently wearing a turban, beheading people for the Islamic State.
Cabezas para el Estado Islámico.
Es que, no, la realidad supera la ficción. Es decir,
The thing is, no, reality surpasses fiction. I mean, well, there we have the boss, Petraeus, who was even director of the CIA. And also, indeed, he was involved in the campaign, invited as the supreme commander in the Iraq and Syria campaign at the time. And well, Donald, there you have one of the great military minds the United States has had, and really, what are Russian generals compared to him? I mean, what are they compared to this guy? You just have to remember the war in Iraq, right?
Solo hay que recordar la guerra en Irak, ¿no? Y cómo al final, pues, quedó.
And in the end, well, what happened? The only thing that was achieved was the destruction of a country and leaving it in absolute chaos, allowing the rise of the Islamic State, the war in Syria, and all the atrocities we witnessed. Because that's why they trained this guy and that guy, like the one right in front of you now with his little tie, so they could do that job. Very constructive, huh? Very constructive. Something for people to think about, especially when it's time to vote, so people consider who they're giving their vote to. What kind of gang has criminals in it?
Juan Antonio, como siempre, un placer la conversación.
Juan Antonio, as always, it's a pleasure to have this conversation. To our supporters, a couple of requests once again. Please help us with a like, give us a thumbs up, and of course, subscribe to our channel. And remember, also support us by subscribing to our sister channel, MP Geopolitica, where in just a little while, Fernando Moragon will start his program. And tomorrow, Juan Antonio Aguilar himself will be on. Please subscribe to that channel as well. And remember, we've also started our English language channel. Juan Antonio, as always, it's a pleasure, a fraternal hug from here to there.
Un saludo a todos.
Greetings to everyone.
Yeah.